You thought this channel was just going to be about Lethal Company or whatever game happens to be popular this week? No. It's time to talk about f***ing Maplestory. So we all have that game or even handful of games that we'll go back to that we know kind of suck in reality, but there's just something that keeps us coming back to it, right? It's not just me? Please, God, tell me it's not just me. Well, either way, I have a good few games that are like that, and maybe I'll end up talking about them all at one point or another, depending on how things go. But today, I want to look at one in particular that is the pinnacle of the nostalgic, but frankly, pretty awful games we've all played when we were younger up until now. And that game, like I said already, is Maplestory, the Korean MMO that somehow is still relevant, if you could call it that, today. Outlasting plenty of other MMOs that were more polished, prettier, had a more engrossing story, less confusing, less grindy, more player-friendly. And yet, this game lives on, with content and updates for it coming out to this day, with the game somehow outliving even its own sequel, which is a shame. I kind of like that one. So what could possibly be keeping this game alive? How is it this MMO from 2003 still has a somewhat active player base with thousands of players still coming back to it a whopping 21 years later? But real quick, for those who don't know what Maplestory is, to quickly summarize, it's a game by Nexon, which if you don't know, it isn't exactly the best of companies, to put it as light as possible. But that not little tidbit aside, this is a 2D MMORPG where you make a little chibi character, you do some story shit no one really reads or cares about, and you go beat up monsters with these really flashy looking abilities that frankly have no right looking as good as they do coming off of these little shits. And aside from that, it's mostly just the MMO staples. You've got plenty of big raid bosses, questing, guilds, and grinding. Don't you worry, Maplestory has plenty of grinding to be had. But all of that wouldn't really make this game in particular stand out. It'd just be flavor of the month type deal that people might have played back then, but swiftly forgotten. Sort of similar to Adventure Quest or IMFU. And I'm sorry to the people who now have to remember that those games exist. Even though Adventure Quest was kind of fire growing up, but definitely not nowadays. But maybe that's a topic for another day. Also, is it IMVU? IMVU? What? How the fuck do you even say that? Either way, that is not the point. Maplestory does kind of strike a niche by being unique in certain aspects compared to other MMOs. In a majority of MMOs, the game mainly wants you to focus on one particular character, powering them up with certain pieces of gear, like a certain legendary axe that I still haven't gotten, for instance. You couldn't know what that's about, though. Improving their skills with certain professions, or even just you improving at playing the class with its potentially complex moveset. Most MMOs aren't really alt-friendly, as it'd be called. Trying to play multiple classes and getting the most out of them is next to impossible. And in certain cases, like Final Fantasy XIV, for instance, it basically makes alts non-existent unless you really want to play the story again, I guess.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Now take all of that I just said about MMOs, throw it out the window, jump out after it, and break your legs in the process. And you have how Maplestory handles its players and their alts. Maplestory damn near requires you to make a shit ton of alts in order to get the most out of each individual character. You still want gear, but it's basically a non-issue because you'll get gear from the hours of grinding you have to do. Speaking of which, instead of complex rotations of skills and abilities you use to get the most out of your character. Seriously, what is this? Shit looks like I'm still in calculus. Majority of Maplestory classes are just pop your buffs off cooldown, mash one or two keys over and over again until the enemy or boss you're fighting is dead, and then continue to do that ad nauseum. Then you'll hit a level benchmark of some kind, unlock new abilities or buffs for your class, and you'll mash those buttons for the next however many hours instead. Really riveting stuff we have going on here, don't you worry. But this game has two systems that essentially mandate that you make alts, or your journey through this game will just be a nightmare, or more so than it already is. And those two systems are Legions and Link skills. Legions are essentially guilds or free companies or whatever the MMO in question calls it when you have a group of people that all join together to talk to one another and do content together. But instead of it being a group of people who all get along and talk to each other and have fun, it's a group of nothing but you. Also, yes, before the Maplestory gods come after me, there are guilds in the game, but just let me have this, please. The only members of your legion are your characters, and they all automatically do raids for you, dealing a set amount of damage to raid boss based on their levels and stats, like we're playing some shitty mobile game that you get ads for that don't even show the actual game. But these raids don't award gear or anything. They award coins that you have to then take to a vendor to buy a bunch of items that you think wouldn't even exist in an MMO. But this is Maplestory, and God isn't real here. Items like these coupons that give you better drop chances for different amounts of time, literally doubling your experience gain for amounts of time. Or potions that just straight up give you a shit ton of experience all at once. And a bunch of items that are some of the most important items for powering up gear that we don't have enough time to get into, frankly, so we're just gonna move on and pretend I didn't even mention it. But that isn't all you get from Legions. Oh no, we're not done yet. Because this is the Synergy Grid, another system tied to your Legion where you place little pieces onto the grid corresponding to your characters That'll give you various buffs based on what class they are. And as you level up your alts more, they'll take up more blocks on the grid based on what archetype they are, and we'll get to what that means in just a second. So for example, this Dawn Warrior, who falls under the Warrior category, shocking, I know, makes a little Tetris looking few blocks here, and gives characters extra health when she's on the grid. But that's also not all this does, because depending on where you put your little blocks in the grid, you get other bonuses like more health, mana, various stats. And if you get strong enough, you can get more specific stuff like extra experience, crit damage, crit chance, boss damage, all kinds of random nonsense. And then there's Link skills, which thankfully aren't nearly as complicated as the Legion nonsense. All Link skills are a little boost that you can put on a character if you have a different character at level 70 on the same server. And of course, it's different for every single class, and it gets stronger when you level up that character more. So this Mercedes will give an experience boost for killing... It's a great take. So this Mercedes will give an experience buff for killing monsters, Demon Avenger gives a flat percentage damage buff, so on and so forth. Not too complicated until you consider that every character has a different Link skill and Legion bonus on them, and you only have a limited amount of characters, so picking which classes to have on a server matters way more than you think it does. You can't just make a character because you think you'll enjoy them, you have to genuinely think about what Link skills and Legion buffs and all this nonsense they give instead. We don't come here to have fun. Also, your characters have to equip the Link skill, and there's a daily cap on how many times you can equip them to the character, and only one character can have a Link skill on at any given time. Make sense? No? Good. We're moving on to the next thing. So needless to say, Maplestory loves you making alts level up and being in their game as long as possible. And even if you're not playing a specific character, you're still making that character stronger by leveling up whatever class you happen to be playing at the moment. A complete departure from other games where your alts kind of get propped up by your main character and not so much the other way around. Not to say that your main character doesn't matter a shit ton to your lower level characters, but you get what I mean. And then there's the gearing system for Maplestory, which is really just all over the place, and frankly, probably not even really a system, but let's just pretend it is. So for a majority of the early levels up to the mid 100s, yes, that's early game by the way, you'll just sort of get gear from the monsters you're killing and not really have to worry about it too much, or you can just buy it off of some vendor with all the money that these same monsters drop. So gear isn't really something that you're worried about almost ever in this game, to start with. Now later on, there's bosses you'd have to fight and pray they drop a piece of gear, even though they almost definitely won't. But for the first however many hours, I couldn't tell you how many, but it's a lot, you just kind of never worry about gear. The gear that you get also isn't super complicated either. There's literally a giant number on the side that basically says, hey, you do more damage with this thing. So you equip it and don't think any more about it. None of the stats on it matter if it does more damage, really. Granted, there are some extra stats here and there that do make a difference, like boss damage or normal enemy damage, that kind of stuff, but no, you don't really have to worry about that until later. There's also the star upgrades that matter, but also this video is already kind of sounding ridiculous to anybody who doesn't play Maplestory, so let's just not talk about that. So the characters aren't super complex or anything either. I was 100% serious when I said all you do is pop your strongest attack until the thing you're fighting stops moving. Stats on gear don't really matter outside of certain factors later on, and your character attributes don't really matter either, since every time you level up you're just going to dump it into whatever makes you do more damage. And you don't even have to think about which one makes you do more damage because the game has a giant green button that says, hey, put it here, dickhead. So I mean, the game really wants you to make other characters because it's super simple to do and really benefits your main character. But what does that matter if the game itself is boring and not that satisfying to really play? Well, in my opinion, Maplestory does manage to be satisfying in a way similar to old school Runescape, which I'm not saying that to be anything against old school Runescape, mind you. But you sort of turn your brain off and just grind for the sake of grinding, and the satisfaction comes more from just being able to do something that isn't super intensive, but still feeling like you accomplished something. The main difference being that with RuneScape isn't exactly flashy, it does have variation of what you're doing. Maybe one day you're leveling up some combat skills, fighting stuff, and the next day you're leveling up fletching or wood cutting or whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of options on what you may want to grind that day. Meanwhile, Maplestory is just what flavor of murder you want to be committing that day. You can have your edgy bolts of darkness from your soul, wielding the power of the sun and the moon to crush your enemies, or have a bear fart on some people. But with all that said, I don't think any of this would matter if this was a new game that just came out last week or something. I do not think Maplestory is competing with Helldivers, to be completely honest with you. At the end of the day, nothing in Maplestory itself really makes that big of a difference. It all comes back to people playing it every now and then out of nostalgia rather than much else, I'd imagine. Or at least I'm fully aware that's the reason I come back to it all the time. That being said, there is a community that genuinely plays and enjoys this game, playing it to the point of reaching the end game and actually beating the Black Mage, which is the final boss that you hear about for the entire game pretty much. But there is a equal or even larger portion of Maplestory's player base that is mainly just here because they played it while they were younger and they don't want to let it go. No judgment coming from me, obviously, because like I said, I do the same thing. But this game came out in 2003, which means a lot of jaded people in their 20s or even teenagers today have played this game while they were kids, and it's kept its mark on you when you did play it back then. This in combination with the fact that this is when the great MMO craze was happening, World of Warcraft didn't come out until a year later, as a matter of fact, really shows that this game came out at the right time and sort of kept that momentum this long. But this game does end up standing out a lot because of its art style, where most of the old areas, characters, and all that are still there from when we played it when we were younger, albeit somehow even less alive than they were back then. To this day, I still remember playing this game when I was a dumb kid and just did not have a single clue about anything while I was trying to play it. I played a warrior, which if you don't know or don't remember how they used to work, their only abilities were just a normal-ass weapon swing that did more damage at the cost of MP, or if you wanted to hit multiple enemies, it was your MP and HP, and you still only do like 10 damage maybe. Back in those days, killing a regular stump was a fucking ordeal, and if you could manage to kill axe stumps, you were well on your way to being an actual big shot in Maplestory. Nowadays, the second you can get to a stump, you can just sort of... So needless to say, times have changed. But not only is that nostalgia there from how the game looks and all that, the music from this game is honestly the best thing to come out of it, with really relaxing music coming from all across it. Like, I could probably play Maplestory music for hours and still find more of it that's genuinely so relaxing and peaceful. It can't be understated how nice some of this music is. There's probably YouTube videos out there that you've watched that have had Maplestory music in the background and you just didn't even know it. So all of that in combination with the sort of grinding nature does really lend to you just sort of entering a flow state of leveling up a character for hours without realizing it. Then looking over at your clock and realizing that it's 1 in the morning again and you've just wasted your night playing Maplestory of all things. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't be right for me to just sing this game's praises and pretend it's not that bad, even though I've made a lot of disparaging jokes about it. Because it is that bad. And the only reason I still play it from time to time is because of that nostalgia and need to grind at something from time to time when I don't know what else to do. Maplestory is not a game for everyone. Hell, it's probably not a game for most sane people. Getting one character to level 70 for you to begin to get any benefit from them for other characters takes hours upon hours, even when you're doing it the most optimal way possible at the start. As you get more higher end characters, this gets easier from the Legion and Link skills, but it's still going to take time even then, and the amount of time to level higher characters takes even longer than that. And those hours aren't exactly filled with something that you can walk away from and feel super satisfied. Like I said earlier, it's just kind of mashing your strong attack over and over until you hit a certain level or kill that boss. Then move on to the next grinding spot or boss to kill that day. Not to mention that this game is by Nexon, which if you don't know is a Korean-based company that isn't the most well received, to say the least. Like how they have pretty predatory marketing across all their games in some form or another. For example, in Maplestory, if you want a pet to follow you around and do helpful things like pick up money for you or automatically use potions for you, you have to spend real money to get that pet, and real money on the ability to be able to do those things. And, unless you get super expensive ones, these pets have time limits on them. And once that time's up, you have to spend more money in order to restart the timer in some way. And it's been like this since the game was made, pretty much, meaning that when you were a dumb kid and you got that Nexon currency card, you probably bought a pet that had a time limit on it, not realizing that it had a time limit on it, and just lost it because you didn't know how to read back then. And granted, there are pets that you can get way later in the game from raids that don't actually cost any money, but that's many hours in the future, and it's still kind of scummy that you could just stick a credit card in the machine and get the benefits from that so much earlier. Also, there's cosmetics in the game that also have timers like this, so you could get a nice looking scythe for a bit, but once those drop, it's gone, and your money along with it. I mean, cosmetics are sort of a staple in most free-to-play games nowadays, and honestly, Maplestory is partially to blame for that. Sort of paving the way for other games to start using gacha-type systems in their games along with the cosmetic shops. But Maplestory is definitely one of the most egregious by having these cosmetics get taken away from you after some time. And apparently they've actively lied about the percentages for cubes that you can use to upgrade your gear and the loot boxes that you can buy in the game for real money. So, in short, would I say to try this game? Hell no. It's not worth it even if you do end up enjoying it. But I can't deny that even to this day I still come back to this from time to time and still enjoy it just like I did all those years ago. I won't ever be at the point that I'm fighting the Black Mage or any of that craziness. But I'll play it from time to time just to relive those memories while I can and have something to turn my brain off and do. And at the very least, Maplestory is one of the few games that's lasted these 21 years and still is online to this day. While some other games from my childhood weren't so lucky, or just aren't the same for one reason or another. And obviously Maplestory isn't really the same as it was back then, but it's close enough. Maybe someday I'll talk about some of those other old games that I played as a kid all the time, stuff like World or Gmod, and how some of those sort of came to be and how they impacted me. From the friends I talked to, the music and things that interest me to this day. Even if Maplestory isn't some diamond in the rough or anything like that, it'll always hold a special place in my heart for what it was to me as a kid. If it's objectively a pretty terrible game, to be honest. I hope you enjoyed some of this rambling about an MMO that hasn't been relevant for years. Maybe you used to play Maplestory back then too. Honestly, I'd love to hear about your experiences with the games you did. There's plenty of other stuff I didn't talk about, like getting married in the game and all kinds of silliness that the game has to it. But that's going to wrap it up for me. Hopefully you enjoyed this little trip down my memory lane. Let me know if you did, or how you'd want to see me change things in the future. Maybe I'll see you in the next one. You're awesome. Have a good rest of your day or night. Goodbye.